Today is filming day, but we have a problem. It is raining, which means it's going to be hard to film videos. But fear not, there is no other day that I can film, and so we're going to have to make do. This should hopefully do the trick. Ta-da! Okay, great, let's get started. So this video has been in the works for a long time. I say in the works, I've just planned it this morning and I'm filming it now. I've spoken about quitting my doctor job in the UK, about the reasons for making the move to Switzerland, and I've already shown you on calls right here in Switzerland to start showing you the differences between the two countries and the two systems. But I haven't actually talked about the process of getting to Switzerland. So this video is hopefully going to explain this process to you. A few disclaimers. So first of all, this is my journey and my process. It's based on my nationality, the languages I speak, the facilities I had, the opportunities that were available at the time. One of the next videos coming up is going to be about how to work as a foreign doctor in Switzerland, talking about the direct ways and indirect ways, whether you're Swiss national, an EU national, and a non-EU national. I thought before going into all of that, a lot of you asked me how I actually managed to make the move, and so this is about my personal move. There we are. So don't think that this is going to be completely, copy-paste applicable to anybody, because there are very specific requirements depending on all these factors that I just mentioned. So that's all the disclaimer out of the way. Now we get to the story time. So let's wind back a few years. I started medical school at King's College London in the UK. So that took 5 years. So during these 5 years of medical school, I had been thinking about working in Switzerland as a doctor, but more in the far away, distant future, and I never really thought about practically making the move. I didn't know if it was realistic, what it would entail, if I would want to move during my training, before I started my training, or at the end of my training, let's say consultant level, but I'd been sort of playing around with the idea in my mind. That's why I decided to test it out during my final year of med school. I can't remember what it's called. What's it called? You have this placement in final year of medical school that everyone looks forward to because it's the placement that you can do abroad. So you can go pretty much anywhere in the world. You have to organize your placement and you can sort of combine traveling and experiencing medicine in a different culture, in a different country, in a different system. And it's a really, really cool experience. And I did part of that placement in Switzerland. The reason I did that was mostly just to see if I would be able to sort of understand and survive in a French-speaking medical system. So I speak French already, but not the academic French, not the medical French. So I wasn't at all comfortable with medical vocabulary. I wasn't serious at all at that point about training in Switzerland. Like I said, I thought about the idea, but this was mostly just to see if it would really be a shock to be surrounded with medical French. And because it was very last minute, I didn't manage to get a placement in a proper, normal hospital. It was in a private clinic in a small town in Switzerland, but it still did the job. I managed to see what it was like to work in a French-speaking environment, and within the space of a couple of weeks, I'd seen that I was already able to make a lot of progress, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. So that was a small reassuring step nonetheless, and I think it was an important part of the process that led to me moving to Switzerland. Anyway, so that was medical school, and as soon as I was finished, I went straight into F1, so working as a junior doctor in the NHS, and it was a really tough time. It was really tough for multiple reasons. So first of all, in the workplace, it was pretty intense. We were redeployed in different departments. The workload was heavier and also maybe less stimulating at some points because you just had COVID all the time. Whereas depending on your department, you were hoping to discover and learn about common conditions in that area. Whereas now it was just COVID. So it was a very difficult time in that perspective. But then also because for people like me who had family abroad, we weren't able to travel at all, and that meant that in a period where you want emotional support, you want to be able to see your family and completely switch off after work, you weren't able to do that anymore. And I think that is the main reason for me actually seriously starting to research for the first time whether it was an option to train abroad. And I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anyone in Switzerland who was working as a doctor, and so I just emailed different hospitals on the French-speaking side, because obviously there's the Italian side, the German side, and I don't speak those languages. So I just emailed random doctors in the hospital asking them, if I could potentially do a placement there, if I could start working there, what the sort of requirements were, and I was just discovering this new system that is very different from the UK one. Mostly I didn't get replies. Worryingly, the replies that I did get mostly said, this is very last minute. Usually you apply 2 years in advance. So we are full until 2024 or 2025. So hurry up if you want to actually properly apply. Because I didn't send in a proper application. I was just sort of sending emails with lots of questions about the application process. And at that point I was like, okay, well, maybe it's not realistic to think that I can finish F1 and then start working abroad. So after those emails, I started looking into the requirements for moving to Switzerland and to try and get all the paperwork together as quickly as possible. Bear in mind, this was the time where I was still in F1. I think I was working in the emergency department, and I was also training for my marathon. So essentially all of my free time that was being used up trying to figure out how the system worked in Switzerland without really knowing anyone in that system. Again, this is the process that I went through. I'm going to make a proper video explaining in detail how you can work in Switzerland as a foreign doctor directly and indirectly. Okay, so this is going to be a very broad summary, and roughly speaking, you need to speak a language. When I say a language, it's because there's 4 different languages in Switzerland: French, Italian, German, Swiss German, it's not the same as German, and Romansh, so that's the least popular or common one. And you need to get your degree recognized. So those are sort of the 2 basic main things. Now, the degree bit was complicated. Although I have the Swiss nationality and I had finished my degree in the UK, I couldn't get it recognized until after F1. Now, the reason for that is, in the UK, you finish medical school and you have a provisional registration with the GMC. So the GMC is the General Medical Council. They are the official body in the UK that sort of makes sure that every doctor is registered with the GMC, that everything is up to date, etc., etc. A provisional registration essentially means that you can work within the NHS, so the public healthcare system, but you can't work privately and you can't work abroad. Once you've finished F1, you get your full registration with the General Medical Council. And at that point, you can, in theory, work in private and you can work abroad. So that was pretty annoying because it meant that I had to wait until the end of F1 to get my final registration. I tried to bypass that. So I tried to send all my documents to MEBICO. MEBICO is the equivalent of the GMC, so the Medical Professionals Commission in Switzerland. For my diploma, I basically sent my King's graduation certificate and my provisional GMC registration. Admin takes time in every country, and it's also the case in Switzerland. So I had to wait a while to get the reply back from that, and they essentially asked for the final registration with the GMC, which meant that I had to wait for end of F1. Now, the reason why that was annoying for me is because I didn't know if I was going to continue with F2 or if I was going to go straight to Switzerland. And if you wait until end of F1 to get your final registration and then you send it to Switzerland, it can take up to a year. It can take time, and you have no idea how long it's going to take. To make things more complicated, there's Brexit going on and there's COVID, and so everything is much slower than usual. With Brexit, I was worried that there was going to be issues with the recognition of my degree, and with COVID, well, again, I thought it was going to take much longer than the usual time. And so here I am thinking, should I just take a break and wait for the results? But what if my degree doesn't get recognized? And in that case, I'm just taking a year out, which I didn't want to take in the first place. So should I just start F2? And then if I get a reply, just quit F2? There's all these things going on in my head. Basically, long story short, because there was a lot of exchange, me trying to still get my degree recognized before the end of F1, I contacted the GMC and asked them to write a letter explaining that I was basically registered, but I just had to finish the year. None of that went through. So after months of me trying to get it recognized earlier, it didn't work. Now, for the Brexit side of things, I had read that between Switzerland and the UK, there had been separate agreements to the EU. So in theory, it should be okay, but I had no guarantee. Fast forward a couple of months and I finished F1. I get my final registration with the GMC. I can't send that straight away because that's the original copy. In Switzerland, they asked for the certified copies, so I have to do that, which takes longer than expected. But as soon as I can, I send all those off. Now, I've taken my annual leave at the end of F1, which means I have a couple of weeks to try and figure out what I'm doing in the next few months. I still don't know if I'm going to start F2. I still don't know how long and if my degree is going to get recognized in Switzerland. Bear in mind also, at the end of F1, I'm just drained. I'm really tired. I want to take just time off and not think about anything, but I'm having to do all this admin and planning. I'm also planning on moving my life to another country, so there's a lot of work to be done. Although I don't know how long the recognition process is going to take, I am hoping that there won't be any issues, that my application is pretty straightforward, and so I decide to close the door to F2 at this point after a couple of weeks, and I give up my job position in the UK. I pack up my stuff and I leave. I feel really lost at this point, and that's when I decide that the only way that I can function in this confusion and this mess is to just presume that my degree is going to get recognised. It's just a matter of time, and that I should just act in accordance with that. So I use those weeks of annual leave to pack all my stuff, go back to London, pack all my stuff there, and move across to near Switzerland, where I start the process of applying for a job. At this time, I'm still training for my marathon, so it's really hard to stick to a routine because I'm traveling, I'm packing, unpacking. In less than 6 months, I had to move 4 different times, so packing, unpacking, moving houses, and sometimes moving countries. So it was a very hectic time, and I did not stick to my initial marathon training plan. But anyways, that is history. So now we're in the application phase to find a job in Switzerland. Still waiting for my degree to be recognised, but hoping there won't be any issues, because you can't start working in Switzerland until you have your degree recognised. But in theory, there's nothing that says that you can't apply. So I got together my application, so CV, motivational letter, recommendation letter. And in terms of the recognition of my degree, I would just say that it's pending, so in process with Mibiko. Now, remember how I said that I didn't really know anyone in Switzerland in the medical world, and that I had emailed people who sort of told me, hurry up, you're 2 years late, basically. What made matters harder is that I didn't find any forums or websites or many YouTube videos, to be honest, explaining how to apply in Switzerland, how the process works. And I was used to the UK where you can just search for anything, and there's lots of people who have already gone through the process and who've shared it online. So what I didn't know then and that I know now is that Switzerland is more old school than the UK. It's not a standardized, centralized system. And there is no typical pathway that everyone follows where you finish medical school, you do F1, F2, you prepare for your exam, you decide what sort of specialty pathway you want to get into, you have your interview, you have your exam, you get accepted or not, you get placed in different parts of the country, and then you've got your run-through program. It doesn't work like that. And it would also be too easy to have websites with actual job offers. You don't do that in Switzerland. If you go on a hospital's website, you will rarely see job offers. So what you're expected to do is send in spontaneous applications. So you contact the head of the department, so the head consultant basically, with your CV, your cover letter, your recommendation letters, and your recognised degree if you have it, and you ask if they have a position available. That's basically how it works. So as soon as I learned that out, which took me a couple of weeks, if not months, I did that to essentially most of these French-speaking hospitals that I could find. And after all those emails, I essentially got no replies, or replies saying that they had no posts available until 2024 or 2025. I had closed the door to F2, so I was in this sort of limbo position. And I think it's a lie to say that those situations aren't difficult. You get the sense of falling behind because you imagine your theoretical self back in your old position, so me back in the UK, going straight into F2 and following the sort of pathway just like all my friends and all the people that I knew in this system. And I'd taken myself out of that, but I wasn't in a new system yet. And I find myself in the middle of 2 systems, not fully in one yet. And I'm feeling lost, and I'm asking myself if I've made the right decision. And what really helped in this situation is to just think, what is the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen is that I can't find a job in Switzerland. The whole thing sort of falls down the drain. I don't get my degree recognised. And so I spend a year trying to make this work, and it doesn't actually work. In that case, I go back to the UK and I carry on with F2, but a year later. So the risk or the thing to lose would be 1 year. And it's not as bad as it could be. And that helped because yes, 1 year is a long time, but also it's not that much in your training. In the grand scheme of things, it could be much worse. And with that in mind, I just went all in and tried to make the thing in Switzerland work. So we're in October, the marathon is just around the corner, and I'm still applying spontaneously to different hospitals. And then out of the blue, I get this email from a HR team in a hospital saying that a position has just been made available in physical and rehabilitation medicine because one of the doctors has had to leave, and would I be interested? So I was like, yes, I would potentially be interested. And they organised a Zoom interview with the head of the department like 3 days later. It went really well. They asked me sort of specific questions about my career pathway, you know, why Switzerland, what I was looking to do, and a few medical questions as well. And they offered me the job on the spot. And I was like, cool, when's it starting? They said, well, could you potentially start next week? You know, we need somebody to cover the position now. That next week was going to be my marathon. So we negotiated on dates and they finally agreed for me to start the week after. At this point, remember, my degree is still in process of being recognised, and I informed them of that. And they were like, yeah, it's fine, hopefully you'll be done before you start working, which was absolutely not a guarantee because it'd only been a few months and it can take up to a year. So at this point, everything happens really fast. I flew back to London a day before the marathon, prepared everything the night before, really nervous, and the next day I ran the marathon, and it was one of the hardest, both physically and mostly mentally challenging experiences, but also the best experience. After the marathon, I was absolutely exhausted, was in a lot of pain, but I had to pack my bags and fly back to Switzerland the next day. So this was the weekend before I started work. So that weekend I moved into a new studio not far from the hospital, and that was it. I lived happily ever after. Well, obviously that is not what happened. Literally that weekend, the flat, which was a very clean studio, happened to have bed bugs, and so I had to move out. The stuff that I had unpacked, I had to repack, get it all washed, move to a different place to wait for that studio to be disinfected. So it was an absolute horrendous weekend, just before the start of my new job. But that's just the beginning of the beginning. This video was meant to be just a factual run through of the process from A to B to get you to Switzerland from the UK if you're in a similar situation. The next video is going to be a realistic run through of what it was actually like once I arrived in Switzerland. What it was like starting in a completely new country, in a new system, in a new job, with a new language. If you're at all curious about how that could turn out, then I hope you look forward to the next video. In the meantime, if you have any questions at all, whether they be medical or about the process of moving to Switzerland, drop them in the comments down below and I'll do my best to answer or include them in the next videos. Have a wonderful day and I will see you in the next one. Bye!